To me, the reason why I think most psychedelic facilitation training is failing the field, right? That's a topic I talk about a lot because I think one of the biggest problems in the psychedelic space right now, and again, especially the 5-MeO space, which I'm in, the Bufo space, is that many people are entering the facilitation space profoundly undertrained, right? And I don't say that lightly, and I don't mean that to be insulting, right? It's, the fact that I've now interviewed hundreds of prospective students for our course, coming into our programs and even from other programs. And to me, one of the most alarming patterns I continue to see is almost none of them received proper informed consent before their own experiences, right? So think about that. As a facilitator, a teacher, and a therapist, informed consent is the foundation of everything, right? That means people are, being guided into some of the most psychologically and spiritually and energetically and physically destabilizing experiences, right, available to a human being. And they were never really properly educated on it, right? Like what's going to happen to the nervous system, what trauma activation looks like, what ego dissolution may entail, right? This new perspective on identity, and what can happen, or emerge, you could say, somatically, psychologically, relationally, or spiritually after the experience. And the big one to me, which is the big one, is how destabilizing integration can become when someone's entire worldview and identity, that structure behind that, is dismantled in 5 to 10 minutes, right? That's not informed consent. To me, that's just negligence disguised as spirituality, right? The medicine will give you exactly what you need, right? Tell that to some of the folks that I'm working with that have had destabilizing experiences and now need benzodiazepines and a psychiatrist. Is that what they needed? Right? So, and to me, the reason this is happening, in my opinion, is because too many trainings in this space are overly spiritualized, and you could even say radically underdeveloped clinically. And that's important to me, right? You can do them both, right? They teach cosmology before they teach contraindications. They teach mysticism before they teach nervous system literacy. They teach ceremony, right? Or even more, the aesthetics of ceremony before they teach trauma responses. And many of them, are attempting to like certify facilitators in a weekend. That's just, I struggle with that. Okay. For medicines capable of dismantling the human self structure in minutes, that should concern everyone because, profound medicine requires profound training. And, to me, facilitation is not about handing someone a pipe and saying, trust the medicine, right? That's a pipe lighter. Again, you've heard me say this a dozen times. I could teach a monkey to do that in a weekend, probably less, right? To me, facilitation is the art of attunement. It's the ability to regulate yourself, your nervous system, right? To be so completely grounded and in understanding your nervous system where it becomes an anchor for another human being in the midst of this temporary dissolution of ego or temporary dissolution of identity, also heard as ego death, right? Or trauma activation or nervous system overwhelm, right? Where they're regulating to you, right? So how are you showing up in the space? It's about knowing when to intervene, when not to intervene, um, when the resistance they're having is protective, or when their nervous system feels surrender is unsafe, right? When someone is moving through catharsis, and when are they actively being re-traumatized? Like these distinctions matter. And I'm just not seeing a lot of that in the space, right? And they can, this is not going to be learned through spiritual platitudes, right? They require education, they require experience, they require mentorship, and they require embodiment. And, I'm not trying to pitch my course, but this is exactly why we built our 5-MeO DMT facilitation program the way that we did, and why we brought in the teachers that we brought in, and why we bring in the guest speakers that we bring in. This isn't a weekend certification. This is a 6-month immersive mentorship process and an ongoing mentorship. The students that first started this program, they've been in mentorship for 4 years, and it will continue to go. And now they're mentoring the new students coming in, right? Because facilitation isn't about gaining more information, it's on information acquisition, right? It's nervous system development, it's identity development, it's learning to become the kind of practitioner another human being can trust with their psyche, their body, and I'd even say in a lot of cases, the most vulnerable experience of their life, right? That's a profound responsibility. So facilitation alone is not enough. Just serving medicine is not enough because even many well-trained facilitators still fall short of one critical area, and that's integration. And I've had some amazing training. I've seen some amazing trainings, but what wasn't emphasized again was what do we do with the experience? Like I don't do integration, and that's fine. And again, I know some folks are going to take issue with that, but that is the most important aspect of the experience. You see the mystical, you have this, connection with source, God, consciousness, whatever term you want to use. Great, that happened. Now, what do you do with that? How do you embody that? How do you live your life differently from that? You just got more information, but more information doesn't equate to change, right? And, integration to me has become one of these most overused and underdefined words in the psychedelic space, right? Everyone says that they offer integration. But when I ask them what that means, very few can define what it actually means, right? For some folks and some practitioners, integration became little more than how are you feeling? What came up for you? What did you learn? And don't get me wrong, like reflection has value. That's not transformation. Because again, insight alone does not change a life. Embodiment changes a life. And embodiment requires protocols, right? And that's why we wrote the book, The Embodiment Protocol. How do we have these experiences and actually live from them, right? An analogy I use is like, yeah, you practice meditation to be mindful, but when you embody it, you're living life mindfully. But it took the practice of meditation to live mindfully, not the understanding of like, oh, you can be in the present moment. I could be mindful. That's just more intellectual information. And so a lot of folks are stepping into these psychedelic experiences and having an experience and then intellectualizing it. And then like, oh, there we go. That just opened the door. That just gave you a glimpse of what the possibilities are. To embody it is why you will show up differently in your life. And, that requires structure. It requires, repeated conscious engagement with new ways of thinking, feeling, behaving, and just orienting towards this new reality. And without that, most psychedelic insights to me, they just simply decay. I call it dying on the vine, right? Having beautiful tomatoes that were beautiful and ripe and primed for you to enjoy, and you just left it there, right? We didn't harvest it. We didn't use it. We didn't take it on, right? And we see this all the time in this space, right? People have profound experiences. They feel open for a week, maybe two, and then they slowly regress back into their conditioned identity structure, right? And so the question to me was when I witnessed this for years, it was like, why? Why? It's because their nervous system and subconscious programming were never retrained. It's that great analogy of like a ski slope, right? Where all your thoughts, emotions, and feelings creates these grooves in the snow, and the medicine kind of gives you fresh powder. But if you go back into the old patterns, all you're doing is going back into the same old patterns and creating the same grooves. We just created fresh powder. So how do we move into a different direction? Okay. Because again, just that understanding is just a glimpse of what the possibilities are, but not a rebuilt structure of identity and of consciousness of how to live. And again, that's why we created the embodiment protocol, which I've been honored to share with so many people and constantly am looking for feedback and improvements, because awakening to me is not an experience. Lots of people have had profound experiences. Awakening is learning to live from what that experience revealed. And this again is where like awareness-based therapy or the awareness reset, one of the things that I work with my clients on becomes so important because what we see psychedelics often do, yeah, especially medicines like 5-MeO DMT or Bufo, in certain doses, it can temporarily take a person offline, right? And their ordinary cognitive identity structure collapses. Everything that they thought about who they thought that they were. And, your defenses loosen, the stories about your past, your history, who you think you are, they start dissolving or loosening, right? And for this brief moment, they may experience themselves beyond their conditioning. What a gift, right? But when they come back online, again, the psyche begins to restructure itself into the old pattern. And that's like this reconstruction process, right? And people often have, this rare opportunity to witness the architecture of themselves being rebuilt in real time. And I've always said it's like the puzzle pieces of you, right, reforming, right? So you had this experience and you were like a whole puzzle. And during the experience, all the pieces got scattered on the table. And then slowly but surely, you get to see the puzzle pieces of your identity reforming. So you get to notice your beliefs, your wounds, um, defense mechanisms, traumas, the adaptations because of life experiences, right? And all these protective strategies that come with that. And all of those are what create the character that you normally call me. I am fill in the blanks. It's usually your beliefs, wounds, defense mechanism, traumas, etc. And to me, that moment is so sacred, so profound, so important, especially if properly guided. It can become one of the greatest opportunities for therapeutic intervention available in consciousness work, right? And I don't say that lightly, right? Yes, you could have these experiences without medicine, but these medicines to me are an accelerant to that. And again, this is where things like awareness-based therapy really meets psychedelic facilitation, not by forcing interpretation, not by the facilitator imposing their meaning to it, but by helping somebody observe what is arising as I come back online, what beliefs are reconstructing, what fear structures are returning. And if you're into IFS parts work or just in general, what protective parts are remobilizing, right? Um, what narratives about myself are reforming. Because once you see that, like once you see all this happening, like from this observer standpoint, from a standpoint of awareness, a witness, right? The programming loses some of its unconscious power. And then now you're in a position where awareness can create choice. And to me, that's where true evolution, if you want to use the word healing, growth, that's where it begins. And so, in our work, we often frame this through what I call the three arcs of the 5-MeO session, right? So if you could imagine a session, full release dose, so to speak, arc one is like the somatic arc. And, you can say that's when a participant is largely offline cognitively, right? Body is processing, the nervous system is discharging, right? And you could witness this, right? Trauma may be moving, defensive structures are collapsing. And I've always kind of used the animal kingdom as a way of describing this, like when a lion chases a gazelle, and the gazelle escapes, like it'll find a place to lay down in the grass and it starts vibrating, shaking, removing that, right? Removing the adrenaline, moving back into what we call homeostasis. When was the last time somebody upset you and you kind of pulled over your car and started shaking that adrenaline out, right? So we just keep shoving it down. So when you have this offline, you're offline cognitively, it's the first time for many people your body finally has an opportunity to allow it. And you'll see this like in a physical manifestation. And it's because people are shifting back to some level of homeostasis, right? And so this first arc is, again, primarily somatic, energetic, attunement based, you would even say, right? Minimum cognition, like you're not even aware you're in this state, but also where it requires the most maximum, I'd say the maximum amount of nervous system literacy, right? You could say then arc two is the reconstruction arc. So immediately as you start coming back online, first off, you didn't know that you were offline, but some level of awareness, kind of the egoic structure starts rebuilding and it's starting to try to make sense of this, right? And again, this is when folks are coming back online. And you could say like the identity structures start reforming. Okay. Now language is returning, orientation to the room starts returning. And then for a lot of folks, fear often returns, right? And I think this is where facilitators can really help their clients observe the reassembly process here, right? As it's being reconstructed, all the puzzle pieces are coming back together. That's where a facilitator could really play a great role. And sometimes that role is just allowing, just witnessing, just noticing, not intervening, right? And then I'd say arc three is the embodiment arc. And this is what happens after the session. Can the participant take what the medicine revealed, right? Or what the experience revealed is better. And then consciously embody it. Can they interrupt these conditioned patterns, the puzzle pieces that they saw coming back together? Which ones aren't in alignment with your values of how you want to be? How do you want to show up in the world? Can they start noticing that program in daily life, right? Can they start practicing living from awareness rather than this automatic programming? Because if not, then the experience is just going to become a memory rather than transformation. And then what's the point? And to me, this is the future of this field, in my opinion, right? This is just my opinion, but I believe it pretty strongly. Not bigger doses, not more peak experiences, not more mystical storytelling, but better facilitation, better nervous system literacy, better informed consent, better integration, better embodiment, right? And a deeper understanding that psychedelic healing or growth or evolution, it's not magic. It's not necessarily the medicine doing the work, right? I understand that phrase. I understand where it comes from, right? To me, it's the medicine creating conditions in which awareness can emerge. And awareness, when applied consistently, that's what transforms lives, right? Otherwise, people would just take medicine and be healed. Is that happening? Very rarely, if at all. And that's the model I teach. Not just how to facilitate experiences. Again, go learn that in a weekend if you want to be special and be the pipe lighter. Knock yourself out. Plenty of facilitators training that, right? But to me, it's like how to learn to be a guide of transformation because our field doesn't need any more pipe lighters. Okay. It it needs more integrated practitioners who understand how to steward human transformation responsibly. And if that resonates with you, then I think you'll likely understand why we built our training the way that we did. Because I think this work deserves more than spiritual performance. It deserves rigor. It deserves ethics. It deserves embodiment. And I'd say in closing, most of all, it deserves facilitators trained deeply enough to meet the true responsibility of this work. All comments or feedback are wanted and cherished. So I hope that resonates with you.